Hello everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Kira, and today we're going to be doing my 2024 reading wrap-up. I will be going through every book I read and talking about what my favorites were, what my least favorites were, my series that I'm going to be continuing, series that I finished. So grab a coffee or a tea or a treat and let's get started. I finally got over my sickness, so my voice is back a bit. I figured today would be the perfect day to do my 2024 reading wrap-up. I read 85 books in 2024, which is awesome. The year before I'd read 26, and the 2 or 3 years before that I had read 0 every year. So I am very proud of myself. It's a big improvement for me. I kind of found tips and tricks to read as a mom or just like a busy person. So I read everything from horror to romance to cozy mysteries and thrillers. And I know not all the genres are genres that people like, so I kind of grouped them together and I would put chapters so you can skip through if you're not interested in some genres. Because there are 85 of them, I do need to go quickly, so I won't be going and doing an in-depth review, so this video isn't too long. And if you have questions, you can ask me in the comments and I will try to answer them. Now that I am not as sick, I should be on top of them a little bit more. So in going over all these books, I realized that I read quite a lot of horror last year. I would say a little less than half are horror, so I'm going to start with that as my largest category. I read mild to medium horror. If you don't like that, you can skip to the other genres. As I said, there's quite a few of them. Towards the end of the year, my reading taste changed and I started getting back into my cozy mysteries, cozy fantasies, some romance, and now all of January so far, I've been reading cozy fantasies. So this year should be quite a bit more diverse in my reading than just horror, but yeah, I do have quite a bit of it in this reading wrap-up. So the first book I started out with the year was Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. This was the second Darcy Coates book I read. I enjoyed it. It's a great winter thriller. It is a little bit more gory than her normal writing, so just a caveat, I would definitely recommend this for a winter thriller horror book. The next book I read was Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell, and I had this recommended to me as a creature feature, Appalachian horror, kind of skinwalker book. The prologue I did think was the scariest part, and he is kind of trying to keep up with that the rest of the book. He did use some like Native American lore, which I always do find interesting. I don't really think that he did it justice like some other books. Having sat on it for a while, I think it's like around a 3 stars. I think there's other winter horror books that I can tell you about later that I enjoyed a lot more. The first one being Ararat by Christopher Golden, and also Pandora's Room, which I will put up here. It follows the same main character. This is a great winter horror. I don't want to give too much away, but they think they found Noah's Ark in a cave in the mountains and they're trapped. It was really great and I really enjoyed this, so I went out and got Pandora's Room from the library, and it's one of the books that I read from the library that I will be adding to my collection, and hopefully I will read the next book soon. The next 2 I read were 2 by Jeremy Bates. I read these 2 mostly because I wanted mountain horror and ocean horror. So I read Mosquito Man first and I really enjoyed it. It's another cryptid creature feature, very great. I read Merfolk later. I didn't like it quite as much. It is good if you want like kind of mermaid horror though. And so moving on, next I read Into the Drowning Deep and Rolling in the Deep by Mira Grant. Rolling in the Deep is the prequel to Into the Drowning Deep, but I highly recommend that you read Into the Drowning Deep more because I found Rolling in the Deep more interesting. Rolling in the Deep is a novella. I read that probably in like an hour and a half maybe. Into the Drowning Deep was great. It is found footage, ocean horror. I really can't recommend it enough. I absolutely loved it and I think she did really great with so many different characters that were in the book, and I liked all of them. The next one I read whose characters I did not like very much was Below by Ryan Lockwood. I thought it was really great start. I loved the creature. I thought it was very unique and very well researched. However, the main character is not likable. There were elements of racism that he put in that just made no sense in the context of the story, and it just ripped me out of it and was really unpleasant. I think elements of that in books can work definitely, and there's a place for them, but if the author does not handle it well, it made me really not like the book. And I will say this was my least favorite book of the year. It's like one of the only books I've given a 1 star, so I did finish it. I just would not recommend that one. And the next book I read that I absolutely enjoyed, was my first 5-star of the year, was This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer. It is a survival horror, which is not normally something that I enjoy, but I have been looking for some others. Very great, but it is gory. It's probably the goriest book that I read this year. The next book I read was The Lost Village by Camilla Sten. A cult, a whole village goes missing and they go back. It had elements of found footage, a previous mystery, dual timelines that I normally like, but I was so bored. I was so bored. Yeah, it wasn't really my favorite. I think there are better cult books if you enjoy those, which leads me into my next one, Last Days by Adam Neville. It is investigative, documentary style, and I thought it had some really great moments. It might have been a little bit too long, but I think people would enjoy this one. The next book I read was The House at Phantom Park by Graham Masterson. I listened to it on audiobook and dual read it on my Kindle. It is a haunted house story that takes place at what was previously a veterans hospital. So there are elements of the mental effects of war and PTSD and things like that, so you should know in that book. In that vein, I thought it was interesting and well researched, and they respected, you know, soldiers' experiences. But as a horror novel, I did find it quite boring. It wasn't scary, and the twist was not a twist, in my opinion. The next book I read was Bone White by Ronald Malf. A brother is trying to find his missing brother in a town. There is some mystery to it. It is a winter horror book, but I just really was bored, and again, I just did not find the twist exciting at all. I know a lot of people love Ronald Malfi, and there are some others that they recommend more, so I might give him a try a little later, but I have none of his books, so probably not this year. The next book that I will be buying, that I did check out from my library, was Near the Bone by Christina Henry. I thought it was an amazing book. It's been marketed as like a winter creature feature. However, I think the human characters are worse in that book. It has one of the characters that I hate the most and one of the female protagonists that I absolutely love the most this year. So I really highly recommend it. There are some triggers to that book though, so I would suggest checking that out. The next book I read was The Broken Places by Blaine Daigle, which I think has one of the coolest covers. It is very creepy and it drew me on that. I wouldn't say it's like Lovecraftian, but it has that vibe. I definitely preferred reading it on my Kindle rather than listening to it. I was listening to it during a project, so I would read it rather than listen. I think you would like it if you like a woods horror. The next book I read was Blood Cruise by Matt Strandberg. This is river horror. It is a booze cruise that takes off and something happens in the middle of the night. It has 30 Days of Night vibes to me, and I really enjoyed it. It is big. I think it is a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but it is a fun read that I just don't hear recommended a lot. So I think you would like it if you like Ocean or 30 Days of Night. The next two books were two creature feature novellas that I read that I got through Prime Reading, which is basically Amazon Prime's own library system. And it was In Bloom by Paul Tremblay and Big Bad by Chandler Baker. Both of these books are part of an anthology that all these writers put together, creature feature anthology, and I have not read the rest of them, but I did like these two. I liked In Bloom better, kind of an environmental horror book, but it was enjoyable. I think it's a really good short read, and I thought the ending fit perfectly. I don't want to spoil it, but I think people would enjoy it. Big Bad is a werewolf horror book. I liked it, but I didn't really connect with any of the characters. I just liked the premise, and since it was so short, I finished it. The next book I read was Theme Music by T. Marie Vanderlee. A young girl's family gets unalived when she's younger, and she moves back into the house to try and figure out what happened. I thought it had some great moments. There's definitely some gore described at some points, and there's some moments that are a little disturbing. I was not too surprised with the twist, but I know a lot of other people were. It did take me till around the 70% mark to figure it out though. I do think people would enjoy this. Just if you don't like gore, there's some moments in this that you will not like. The next book I read is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. This is definitely in the thriller category more than horror. I loved the found footage element, and I did like some of the characters. I did think the twist was a little bit predictable. I kind of clocked it a little early on, but the author did a good job at making me second guess that. So I think people would enjoy this one if you like found footage thriller type books. The next book I read is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is also, I think Riley Sager is more considered thriller books. It's sort of an Amityville situation. This young girl grows up in a house that her father writes a book about that was supposed to be haunted, becomes really famous. And she's going back after her father dies to fix it up and figure out what actually happened. There's a bit of a dual timeline situation, so I did enjoy that. I would say this is kind of a good way if you want to read horror to get into it. Just start with this one because it's not that scary in my opinion, but it is a good starting point. So the next 3 books that I have are 3 of the Dark Earth Rising novels by Deborah Castaneda. I really liked these books. The first one, A Dark and Rising Tide, is a ocean horror. There's a hurricane that happened and this town gets cut off and they have to deal with some interesting things. I love her covers. They're so great. I really enjoyed this book. I loved all the characters and what she did with it. It was unique in my opinion. The next one was The Devil's Shallows, which is one of my favorite creature features. And it also involves a town. It's a community that's being built and it's kind of high tech. And it's built near a marsh where this legend of the sloth devil is. They eventually start figuring out that that's not as much of a legend. I love local like urban legend, folklore type books, and this was great. The creature was so unique. There is some triggers to this one. I really loved this one, and I think about it quite often, honestly, and I'm surprised by it, but it was really great. And the next book, which made me the most interested in her writing, was The Root Witch, and it was probably my least favorite of the 3. I did enjoy it. Again, there's an urban legend. I had it described as the Blair Witch Project to me, and it's definitely not that. It is in a forest and there's a legend to it, but she really does something unique to it, so I will give her respect for that. I just didn't enjoy it as much as the other ones. But overall, I think she's a really great horror writer, and I have enjoyed all of the reading from her, so I will be getting the rest of her collection eventually. So the next book I read was Claw by Katie Berry. It was actually how I found out about the Prime Reading program. So I don't actually have a copy, but I will be buying it. I very much enjoyed it. It is winter horror. Some people start to go missing. It is a creature feature, and it's very unique. It's insane, some of the scenes. It is gory at some points, but I just loved the town. The main character was really great. I enjoyed him thoroughly, and the side characters as well. His son, I just loved all of it. It's really underrated. I will be reading Claw 2 soon because someone in one of my book groups gifted me the Kindle version, so I definitely enjoyed it and I recommend it. The next book I read was Ghost Camera by Darcy Coates. It's a collection of her short stories. I liked the Ghost Camera story, but I definitely did want it to be longer, and I didn't really like any of the other short stories. I might unhaul this. I don't see myself rereading it. Next book I read around Halloween was Below by Laurel Hightower. This is a cryptid sort of mosquito man situation. Someone's driving through the mountains. They get lost in a blizzard. There's a crash that happens, and then she kind of has to fight for her life. I read it. It's not very long. I would recommend it if you like little short creature features, but it really wasn't my favorite. I guess I had different expectations for the book, and I shouldn't have it, but yeah, it wasn't as fun as I thought it was gonna be. The next book is All Hallows Eve by Michael Penning. I read this on Halloween, which really worked out. It takes place on the East Coast, and a mother and her daughter arrive to try and find her missing husband, and children go missing, so she has to spend the night with another man trying to find his child as well. I thought it was really great, and if you want something that's more Blair Witch Project or Salem focused, I think this would be a good book for you. I enjoyed it, I really did. And I think I will try to read some more of his writing. The next book, which I also read around Halloween, is Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. This is a bit of a cult book, cult classic book. They made it into a movie. I did enjoy it. It follows a town where all of the boys have to run on Halloween night to try and kill this creature. And I just thought it was very unique, very interesting, a great little short read. It took me one evening to do, so I do recommend it around Halloween. I think it's a perfect season for it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really great. The next book that I enjoyed, that I had talked up quite a lot on Books of Horror group, is The Exorcist House by Nick Roberts. This is a demon possession horror book. There's a few disturbing parts to it and a little bit of gore, but I thought it had some really great spooky moments, and I plan on reading the prequel to this book, The Exorcist House Genesis. I just have not gotten my hands on it. And he has some other books, so we will see if I read those. Probably not this year though. And the next book, which I absolutely loved, is Fever House by Keith Rawson. This is one of the most unique books that I've read, an easy 5 stars. It is so unique and like this rock and roll element, and once it starts, which is almost immediately in the book, it just doesn't let up. It was really hard for me to put this down. I highly recommend this book. If you read none other from my horror list, this is a really high one up on that list. So the next book that I read that I've already unhauled is episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. It's found footage, haunted house, an investigative documentary style. I thought I would love it, but I was so bored. The twist was not a twist. I just did not enjoy that book. I was very frustrated with it because, again, expectations. I thought it was going to be different, so I got rid of it really quickly. But yeah, I did not enjoy it. The next book that I really enjoyed is The Whispering Dead by Darcy Coates. This is book 1 in the Gravekeeper series. The 5th one is coming out this year in a few months. The main character's name is actually my name. She wakes up not remembering anything, but she figures out she can see the dead. She gets given this cottage by a graveyard as well, and she's trying to figure it out. I love the town. I love the friends she made. I love her trying to figure out how to do this, and then the mystery of her background is very interesting to me. So I really loved this book. I gave it a 5 stars. The next book I read is Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, and this one is a haunted house book. They go to a very haunted house, and it's all these horror writers that go for an interview, and then things start to happen. I loved the writer element to it and the horror element, and how the author wove in those elements to the plot of the story. Very unique. It wasn't that scary, but I enjoyed reading it. The next book I have is The Har by David Sodergren, also recommended to me as a ocean type horror book. Main character's in her 80s, which I thought was very unique. I liked her. I've never hated property developers more. This whole town's kind of being taken over, and then things start to happen. There is quite a bit of gore. I just did not enjoy the book. I know a lot of people love it and think it's great. So if you like that sort of thing, Lovecraftian in a way, sea creature, I don't really know how to explain it, you will like that book. I did not enjoy it. A book that I did absolutely adore, and an author that I plan to continue reading and have read, is The Sundown Motel by Simone James, and I also read The Haunting of Maddie Clare. Haunted motel, someone's aunt goes missing decades before, and she goes to figure out what happened to her, dual timelines. I loved both of the main characters, and I found it super interesting. I really loved this book. She focuses on women and their stories in all of her books, and I gave it a 5 stars. So I went and read The Haunting of Maddie Clare as well, which is also a young girl that dies, and she's haunting a barn, and someone's doing a documentary and brings another female character around. So I enjoyed the male characters in this one, but it's obviously the female story, and so I really like that she doesn't really take away from their journey and what happened. I will be reading definitely more of Simone St. James and getting the rest of her backlog. I really highly recommend her as an author. So the next book I read was Ghost Road Blues by Jonathan Mayberry. It is book 1 in the Pine Deep trilogy. I have already unhauled it. I won't be reading the rest of the series. I should have checked trigger warnings for that book. There is quite a bit of ultraviolence and some things that really were not enjoyable for me to read. I think a lot of people do enjoy that series and it's fine. It's not too crazy. It just was not my cup of tea, honestly. So if you like a little bit more violence in that book, you would like it. And I feel like some of the main characters were like the antagonist a little bit from The Stand. So I think you would enjoy that series if you like that book. It's just not for me. And I have like 3 or 4 more books left, so bear with me and then I will get to my next ones. So the last books are all winter Arctic horror books. So the first book I have in that is Underneath by Ravi Dorman. I did enjoy it, but there's a lot of parts that I don't really remember, and it was back in November. And I do retain a lot of the stories that I read, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. I do remember enjoying it as I read it, but I think it was just kind of there. The next book I have is Ice by T.S. Falk, and I remember that one very clearly because it is almost the exact plot of The Thing, and they changed the mechanism of it a little bit, the creature element of it, but yeah, it was down to flamethrowers and the main character not being a scientist and people getting fined and going to another station to figure out what happened. It was so much like The Thing. So yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I would just watch The Thing. And the next book is The Siberian Incident by Greg Beck. I love Greg Beck's writing. I would say he's more adventure thriller, and this one is about a couple that buys this fishery in Siberia, and they go and there's some things, there's legends in the area, and there's things coming out of the water. He seemed to think that he needed more of a human adversary as well, which I don't mind, but this one was just very like kind of character of it, like local Russian mob and stuff, and I didn't enjoy that element of it, but the rest of it was definitely unique and there were some great moments to it. I love Greg Beck's writing, so I will continue it, but yeah, this one wasn't my favorite. It was just okay. The next one is Thin Air by Michelle Paver, which I read recently. It is a mountaineering horror book. Michelle Paver is very different writing, but I absolutely loved this book. Thought it was really well done. Hauntings in a different way, and if I talk about it, I will give it away, but I do recommend these ones. Nothing crazy disturbing, but very interesting and very well written. And the last one is The White Road by Sarah Lotz. It was well researched when it came to mountaineering and their spelunking, and it deals with some disasters and what's involved with that, but I really hated the main character, and I think just like by why he's at both disasters, I feel like it would be really hard to like him. So I don't know if that was like her choice and she meant it that way, but it kind of pulls you away from the book and caring too much, in my opinion. I had one more, and the last one is Haunted by Perrin Manor by Lee Mountford, and this is a great horror haunted house book. Loved it. There's 9 books in the series, and I fully intend on reading the rest of them. It had some really great moments. I will never leave my blinds open at night for sure because of this book. So all right, so that was all of my horror books. In total, that was 45 of them of my 85. So yeah, I definitely had a horror heavy year. Going forward this year, I'm definitely not reading as many. Hopefully this is not too far in the video and this isn't too long. So my next category is sci-fi. I did read more sci-fi than I thought I would this year, starting with Dune by Frank Herbert. I wanted to finish reading this before the second movie came out, and I thought it was really great. I loved the comparison, and I loved the movie version too. I thought they did it really well done. There's a lot of world building, which I really enjoy. I liked the first half of the book more than the second, but I think it's a really great sci-fi book. It's just, in terms of like sci-fi, I would compare it to like high fantasy when it comes in fantasy rather than like kind of regular, just because it's so detailed. And the next books that I have in my sci-fi and the last books are the first 4.5-5 books of the Murderbot Diaries. I didn't end up finishing Network Effect by the end of the year. but I love them. They're all great. The first one's a 5 stars, and the rest of them, like the second one is like 4.75, the third one is 5 again. I love the Murderbot character. I do not like artificial intelligence stories, and I just have been inhaling the series. Murderbot's character is antisocial and snarky, and I just love it. You just have to read it. I think even if you don't like sci-fi, you're gonna like this series. So my next category is my nonfiction category. I am not a huge nonfiction reader, but this year I did read 3, and they are all about mountaineering or disasters. I just find it fascinating, even though I am not like a hiker whatsoever. I do like paved walking paths, but I enjoy reading about them, and it definitely made me want to read more nonfiction a little bit this year in things that I'm interested in. But the first book that I read, easy 5 stars, is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. He also wrote Under the Banner of Heaven, but it follows the 1996 Everest disaster that he was present for, and I thought it was really well done, really well researched. He was very sympathetic to everyone that was on the mountain and did not shy away from his mistakes and other people's as well. I think it was just very interesting and very well done, and I am probably going to read more of his work as well, because I just think he's extremely thorough and I just like to learn things. The next one that I read was No Way Down by Graham Bowley, and that was about the K2 mountaineering disaster, and I thought it was really well done. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook version, because I think that they wrote it less as an investigative piece and more as a work of fiction, but it's all based on his investigation, his conversations with people that were there. So yeah, I think it was done really well. It did make me teary, and I don't really cry at books, so just so you know. And the last book that I read in this category was Denali's Howl. I actually had to take it back to the library yesterday, and that was by Andy Hall, and it's about Denali in Alaska. There was a disaster in which the winds reached a speed of like 300 miles per hour while people were up on the mountain. So I did think it was very interesting. It was very well researched. There was one point where it was like down to like 1:24 in the afternoon. Like, it was very detailed. So it was a little slower for me to read. I'm a pretty fast reader. So if you like that sort of thing, all of these books I do highly recommend. I think they were really, really well done. So my next category is actually middle grade and YA put together. I only have one middle grade, so I'm just going to kind of combine them. So the first one that I read is my middle grade book, and that is The Girl in the Castle by Lindsay Curry. I fully intend on reading more of her books. I loved this. I loved the main characters. They were 12. They live in a town that has the story of a witch or a ghost, and it was perfect to read during fall, and I loved them, and I loved their little investigation, and it was really enjoyable to read, and I plan on, again, reading more of her writing. The next one that I read was The Girl in the Castle by James Patterson. It had dual timelines and like these main characters back in the medieval times that I just really did not enjoy the book. Check triggers for that. Was not mentally prepared for the book, and yeah, not for me. Next one I read was Illuminae, which is a trilogy that was written by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. Found footage, well, not really found footage. It's like where they piece together emails and interviews, and normally I find that very interesting, but again, they're teenagers, and I just did not, I'm just not at that phase of life. I know a lot of people really love the series. It's just not for me. The one YA that I absolutely loved, and I plan on finishing the series, is The Naturals by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is YA Criminal Minds. I loved the characters. There's a little bit of teenage elements to it, but really it's more about how intelligent they are and why they're there. And I just flew through this book, and I have the other books in the series, and I plan on reading them this year, so I do recommend that one. All right, so my battery died, so I had to switch to something else, so sorry if the view changed, but we will go on to my next category, which is my romance book. I used to read a lot more romance than I do, and I probably will be reading some more this year, but I just kind of got out of that. So I only read 4 this year, but they were some of my favorite reads, honestly. And I found a new favorite author that I'm planning on reading this year, and it's going to be one of the ones that I allow myself to buy. And that is Kimberly Lemming. So I read That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, and That Time I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. The titles alone made me laugh when I saw them, but the books themselves are wonderful. They are rom-com, but fantasy. The main female characters are hilarious, and they're so like spunky and just so fun. A lot of descriptions of food, and they live in this area called Boohale. Creatures like demons and werewolves, and I just loved it, the whole experience. I'm going to read book number 3 soon, as well as the new book that she has coming out in February. I love them. I cannot recommend them enough to people. I think you would just like adore them if you read them. The next book that I have is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. It follows a main character whose heart was broken, and she like drunkenly curses her ex, and then he comes back to fix something in the town. They're warlocks and witches, and just things go completely haywire. I love the town. I love the descriptions of all the magic and her aunt, and just like the whole situation was really enjoyable. I thought there was a lot of funny moments, and so it kind of got me back into reading more like fantasy rom-coms. And the last one I read was Scream for Us by Molly Doyle. I got it a while ago as like a gift. I did read it around Halloween, and it's just not my cup of tea. I'm not in my spicy era. I think a lot of people would like it. It's just not for me. I don't even know if I rated it, just because it felt a little unfair, because I was just not in that like phase of my life. So my next category are all of the adventure thrillers that I read this year. I like adventure thrillers because they've got some creatures in them, but also science, like mix of supernatural sometimes. So it all just speaks to my brain, and I just like the nerdy parts of it, so it works out for me. So the first books I read are my Nora Kelly, Preston and Child books, but it is Old Bones, Dead Mountain, and The Scorpion's Tail. And they're all about Nora Kelly, who's an archaeologist, and I just love the historical element and the scientific element of it. And for this series, they tend to kind of use a mystery that happened and then just build on it. So Dead Mountain's about the Dyatlov Pass mystery that happened. Reading about those are just interesting in themselves. Old Bones is about the Donner Party, and The Scorpion's Tail happens around in New Mexico. Fun fact, I did live in Santa Fe with my husband for a little bit. She lives there, and so it's very interesting when they talk about places that I've been. Overall, I really enjoy the series. Yeah, really highly recommend it, and I love their writing. Case in point, one of my favorite reads of the year as well is the first book in the Pendergast series. I've spoken about this before if you watch some of my other videos. I am going to start from the beginning, which is this book, and reading the rest of the series, which is like 27 of them, so it's going to take me a little bit. But love it, love the creature feature. This was made into a movie with Tom Sizemore, which I think was actually done really well. I liked the side characters in that one, but they just didn't have Pendergast, which made no sense. But I loved this book, and I'm very excited to read Reliquary. I'm probably reading that in the next couple of weeks. So the next book I read, which was an adventure thriller, is Eruption by Michael Crichton and James Patterson. I don't think I've talked about this before, but when I was younger, I was really obsessed with like tornadoes and natural disasters, and I wanted to like be one of those people that helped plan for them, and like basically Tommy Lee Jones' character in Volcano. So that's why I ended up reading disaster books. But I saw this. It's about a volcanic eruption in Hawaii, I believe. I did really enjoy this. I liked the science of it. I like how they got around it and detailed, you know, how they were investigating the mountain and the other characters that were involved. I had fun, and I went through it really quickly. It was very fast-paced. And the next 6 books, which I'm not really going to go into too much detail about, are my Anthony M. Strong, John Decker series. It starts with What Vengeance Comes, and our main character is a police officer that becomes somewhat like of a monster expert. There's always lore involved, which I really like. I've told you that earlier in this video. And something in history or something that they're investigating. I've enjoyed every single one of them, and there are more of them. I want to get them. The next one is Cold Sanctuary, which is more of an Arctic horror feel, and Crimson Deep, which is a Florida woodland situation. The next one is Grendel's Labyrinth, which is definitely more lore heavy, and I just like the Beowulf and Grendel, so I was very interested in that one. Then there was Whitechapel Rising, which is about Jack the Ripper, and then Black Tide, which has a lot to do with World War II submarine history, which I also am very interested in. I'm kind of a World War II history buff. I've enjoyed every single one of them. I've gone through them very quickly. They're not hard reads. I do recommend them if you want a new adventure thriller. So editing me realized that I forgot 3 books, and they're all by the same author. I had it written in a weird spot. So they're all by Michael McBride. It's a new author I found this year through Amazon Prime. 2 of the books are part of the same series, which is the Unit 51 series, and I loved both of them. I really loved Subhuman, which is the first book. The second book is Forsaken. It follows the same characters. I love all of the characters, and Subhuman is very science heavy at the beginning, but it turns into kind of a horror novel towards the end. So I really loved both of them. Forsaken is a little different. It's in a different setting, but still really enjoyable. I still need to read the 3rd one this year. The last book is Chimera, and that is also in Antarctica. It's a winter thriller, and I really liked what they did. His books are always pretty science heavy, but I really enjoy that, and I loved the characters, and I thought his mechanism creature feature was very unique for sure. So I really like this author, and I will continue to read his books in the coming year because I have a couple of them. My last and final category is my cozy mystery. First is The Ghost of Marlowe House and the Haunting Danielle series by Bobby Holmes. I listened and dual read this, so I highly recommend the audiobooks with these. Our main character inherits a house that she's turning into a B&B, and there's a ghost in there. I love the ghost. He becomes like a main character. Just thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I plan on reading the other ones, but there are a lot in the series. I think there's like 30 books in this series, so definitely wanting to dive into the rest. Next book is Toil and Truffle, a Gloam Hollow mystery by Lenore Jane. This is also the author J.L. Vampa. Loved this one. The main character's witchy. The town changes seasons like really quickly, like in a day, and it's just so fun. Really cozy. I ended up baking some things from this book because there's recipes. Just loved it. Loved it. Another book series that I read is Julianne Lindsay's Cider Shop Mysteries, and they are by far my favorite cozy mystery series that I've read. Perfect for fall and winter. I love Winnie. I love the side characters. The town is amazing. So I read Apple Cider Slaying, Pulp Friction, and the Cider Shop Rules, and I will probably end up rereading them in the fall just because they're so perfect. And I made recipes. I just love them. If you want to start in cozy mysteries, that's where you start. And the next books I read were the first 2 books in the Carol J. Perry Witch City Mysteries, Caught Dead-Handed and Tales You Lose. I am reading the other ones as well. I have 3 or 4 more of them. I loved them. It takes place in Salem, Massachusetts. Our main character has some abilities, but there's always an unaliving. I love the aunt's character, Aunt Ibby, the house. Everything is just a character that I adore. And it was just so fun. Cozy mysteries make me happy. The next book is Steeped in Secrets by Lauren Elliott. This is a first book in the Crystals and Curiosities mystery. I read this earlier this year, and I do have the second book, so I probably will be reading it sometime in spring. It takes place in a cottage by the sea, so it's pretty perfect for spring, summertime. Love the main character, there's a dog in it, and just all of it. It's just a really great series, and I just always love the towns themselves too. And the last book that I read, it's one of the last books of the year actually, was Christmas Cookie Murder by Leslie Meyer, and it is a Lucy Stone mystery. There's quite a few books in this series as well, and it's easier to find at my library. I loved the Christmas elements. They made the main character very realistic, and she's a mom of children, and so that kind of resonated with me as well. I liked her investigation, but I liked all of the kind of craziness of the Christmas season, and it was really great to read at that time. So those are all my books. If you're still with me, thank you. I really appreciate you sticking around. I think I had a really great reading year. I don't think there were a lot of books that I really just did not jive with, and I didn't really DNF that much, so that was really great. And there were a number of new authors and series that I found this year that I'm very excited to continue going into this year. As I said, I was very heavy with horror and thriller this year, but I am definitely more diverse in my reading right now, even 3 or 4 days into January. So this year will look quite a bit different at the end of the year in terms of like the ratios of it. But overall, some of my favorite reads were Into the Drowning Deep. I think it's my favorite read of the year at this point. It had everything I wanted in a horror book. I just thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. But I also really loved Fever House just because of how different it was. The Cider Shop Mysteries were absolutely some of my favorites as well, just because it got me into the genre. It was just perfect in terms of atmosphere, and I'm officially a cozy mystery convert because of that. But ultimately, I think my favorite series of the year definitely ends up being the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. It just is wonderful, and it's definitely helping me get out of like the horror thriller mood that I've just been in for a while. So I am very excited to finish that and read the rest of the series that I'm planning this year. So thank you again for joining me. I do have some cozy content coming up and every book on my physical TBR. So if you're interested in that or you liked this video, please like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. Let me know if you have any questions on some of these books or if you've read some of them. I always love to hear everyone, and I'm trying to get better about answering comments now that I'm not exactly sick and the holidays, I've gotten through the holidays. So I really appreciate you all joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!